All right. Good morning, Doug. We're back with a Friday Q&A. Lots of great questions from people. Let's see. I'll just go ahead and get right into it. Someone recently read a Casey dispatch. That's through the research firm that you founded called Casey Research, where you talked about passing down wealth. Specifically, it was concerning Commodus being undeserving of Marcus Aurelius' wealth and power and adopting more worthy children instead of passing his wealth along. So the question is, where do you think the parent's responsibility begins and ends in producing productive children worthy of inheriting wealth?
Well, it's a question of theory and practice. And I understand the theory really well, but I've never reproduced because uh, it's if it's not a full-time job, it's a major job bringing up kids, I think, if you're going to do it right. And I do believe in homeschooling. And it can be beneficial to both the parent and the child to do homeschooling. And I guess, Matt, we've talked about doing a segment on homeschooling next week. I think
Yep.
that might be fun. So where's your responsibility? Well, look, I guess first of all, as we've said before, I'm mainly a believer in nature, not nurture. And I believe that just from watching my dogs and horses. Sure, how they're brought up makes a difference, but it's basically nature, much more than nurture. So, how much responsibility do you have for throwing a demon seed if that's what the kid turns out to be? And it could be that Marcus Aurelius had the theory down perfectly, but maybe he was so busy being the emperor that he didn't spend any time with this kid. Maybe he didn't choose the kid's tutor properly. Maybe he just wasn't a good father. And maybe Commodus was a natural born psychopath. I mean, we just don't know. I mean, nobody's going to tell us these things. All we can do is conjecture and speculate. But frankly, when it comes to kids, I think the Romans had it right, talking about Marcus Aurelius and Commodus. It's that rather than acting as a survival machine for your genes aren't on your side. You're nothing but a survival machine for them.
Right.
And, the kind of kid that you have seems to me to be the luck of the draw more than anything else. And if you really want kids, maybe you should wait until a kid reaches the age of reason so you see what you're getting, see if the kid is worthy, and then adopt him from there. That's what the Romans did. They didn't adopt babies. They didn't adopt toddlers. They adopted kids if it was a wealthy family that wanted a kid, once they knew what they were getting, whether they knew that the basic material was worthy. So maybe that's the answer. But I don't have practical experience on being a father. So all I can do is conjecture. What do you think, Matt? You have practical experience.
Yeah, I have practical experience, but I can't say that I feel like it's a giant experiment that I could be screwing up terribly, and I won't know until much later how it turns out. Not really. But I think my view on responsibility of the parent is the parent has to be there, has to be there. So if the child is worthy, that you can enable that. So the parent has to still show up, but I don't think you can control. You can't manufacture I mean, I used to think this. I used to definitely believe in nurture, and then I thought I'd have kids and I'd make them be a better version of me. I'd shape them and it's become so obvious very quickly that you can't do that. I mean, you can show them things that might help expand the way they think about the world around them, but you're not manufacturing here. They nature part of it is super compelling. So I think the responsibility for me, I think is just you have to, if it's kind of like if the student is ready, the teacher will appear. So from a parent-child standpoint, the parent has to appear for the child if they're ready to be what they might be, but you can't control it. Can't control it. I do think Marcus Aurelius was actually himself adopted, right?
Well, let me see. The previous emperor was uh, Marcus Antoninus Pius. I think you're right. He wasn't the son of Antoninus Pius.
But he
Where
shared
did?
power with him. He shared power with his actual son.
Yeah. Huh. I'll have to look that up. That's an interesting bit of trivia. But there was uh, there was an article I read about racehorses the other day, and the last Triple Crown winner was a horse named American Pharaoh. And I don't think we've talked about this, did we?
Oh,
So it turns out that there are these auctions for horses with very good bloodlines that have champion sires and champion dams, and they go for a lot of money because you're hoping to, maybe it'll be the next Triple Crown winner. So American Pharaoh was good looking, but kind of a mediocre horse in that company that they paid $300,000 for. But why did they choose American Pharaoh? Because the buyer was using the kind of the methods of the guy in baseball that picked up all these second string players because they were really good at one thing, but they were cheap as
Moneyball.
opposed to,
The guy in Moneyball.
yeah, exactly. So he was using the same method. And doing some scientific research, he determined that the most important thing on a horse was the size of the horse's left ventricle and spleen. That would give it the ability to run fast over a long distance. And he examined all the horses in question, picked up American Pharaoh for $300,000, and subsequently, American Pharaoh has been earning millions of dollars per year in stud fees.
Amazing.
So, yeah, so can you do that with your kid? Well, odds are better if you're adopting a kid. And you and look, and if I had a bunch of kids and wanted to leave my wealth someplace, the last thing I'd do would be leave it to a foundation of some type. I'd like to leave it to my kids, but if the kids weren't worthy, I'd say, look, no hard feelings, but you're going to have to make your way in the world. I mean, just because you won the Lucky Sperm Club lottery. So I don't know if there are any answers to this, but
Yeah, I don't think
I
there are
think
any.
there's, I think there's, not, isn't there a need for a book about this? I mean, I'm not talking about Dr. Spock's kind of book, but a book that addresses this type of thing, because people often complain, hey, there's no instruction manual for bringing up a baby or whatever, or school that you go to for being a parent. But
I,
it's important.
it is important, but I mean, there's so many variables. Like even if let's say you do the parenting part right, just in terms of setting, being a good role model and creating an environment where they could thrive, and setting expectations clearly, having the right amount of discipline but not too much discipline, and that changes over their age. There's lots of different things that seem like are probably the right way of doing it. But then you send them to a public school or a government school for, when they're having a wave of wokeness, and it can all be undermined because the value of their opinions of their peers is going to be more important. You just can't avoid that. So there's these variables that are very difficult to understand or to be able to manage, I guess. But ultimately, if you believe in nature, then the kid's going to be the kid they are no matter what. And I have to say, with mine, I really believe, I have two, they are fundamentally the same humans they were when they were two. Like, they really, like, their disposition is the same. They're very different from each other. And I have a lot of siblings, and I'm very different. I mean, I feel like I'm the same way I've always been. They're very different, and always the way they've been. So I do believe more in the nature part, like you. And in that case, it's like, does it even matter what you do? I mean, I didn't have perfect role model parents, and very few people do. I feel like I turned out all right.
Yeah. Perhaps this is one of these practically unanswerable questions.
Yeah.
Questions that there's really no quick fix answer. So what's next?
All right. Next is let's see. Does Doug see a possible scenario post COVID where travel is restricted to one's own country and individual countries try to restrict freedom of movement throughout one's own county or state?
Uh, yes, I think I do see that kind of future. That the world is becoming more well. It's look. We've talked about the breakup of countries in the past, starting with the Soviet Union and Yugoslavia and the Czech Republic, and then North and South Sudan and a bunch of European countries. So this breakup is going to be based on nationalism. And of course, uh, when you're nationalistic, you have less contact with people of other nations. So that's kind of the big macro scheme. But these people that are running governments and government as an entity has been growing in credibility for many decades now. And we've gotten to the point where the kind of people that get into government who like to control their fellow citizens or fellow subjects, if you would, at this point, we've gotten to the era Papieren Bitte from those old World War II movies where the Gestapo would ask everybody they saw to identify themselves. We've really gotten to that. And it's getting more serious. For instance, I just heard this morning, this is unconfirmed, but I heard this, that unintended consequences. I don't know, have you ever read that book, Matt?
No, I have not.
It's by a chap named Ross, and it's basically a gun book. It's pretty long. It's like 700 pages, and it's got a lot more on guns than most people want to hear about. But it's basically about a revolution in the U.S., and it's pretty straightforward on that. And the guy that wrote it, I think his name is John Ross, couldn't get it published anywhere. He published it himself and sold, I don't know, he sold in the six figures uh, of it. But now, apparently, the God knows the ATF and the DEA and a bunch of these agencies are starting to give him a hard time. You can't even get the damn book printed to distribute anymore. So apparently, he's just published it online. So maybe if you can get unintended consequences free online, because it's a pretty subversive book. Anyway, look, the Bolsheviks have taken over. And they're the people that have taken over the government in Washington, as far as I can tell, are exactly the same character types that took over Russia in 1917. They have Bolshevik personalities, and they're going to act like Bolsheviks. So the answer to the question is, yeah, travel is going to be restricted, both as a legal matter and a practical matter with this COVID nonsense. So
Well,
yeah, we're in for tough times.
we have seen some examples of right now of these travel restrictions. I have a friend who lives in Frankfurt, and they're not allowed to go 15 kilometers beyond their registered living address. And if they're caught, then the fines are quite substantial. And they've talked about jailing people who are repeat offenders for going more than 15 kilometers away. We know about people in the U.S. Who met this was in the U.K. Sisters who lived far away from each other, but they met at a McDonald's parking lot because they hadn't seen each other in a while. So they drove to a parking lot and they were both fined for that. So there are, once these authorities seem to have tested these things out, they're really controlling the free movement of people, and they kind of like it. They only expect that to expand from here. And I think it's going to be on the local level, not just certainly on the interstate level or international level.
Yep, I've heard a lot of anecdotal stories like that, both in the US and Australia, New Zealand, Europe, all kinds of places around the world, even South Africa, you name it. So the trend is in motion and accelerating. So it's a pity.
It is. Next question is: would Doug speak to the tactic perversely utilized by many today, the constant redefining of words? Now, we did a whole episode on language. I'll encourage people to check that out, and I'll link to that in the description. But can you talk about the redefining of language and just your thoughts on it generally?
I think it's part of the process that's become recently popularly known as gaslighting from from a movie. I think the movie was called that, but a movie in the 30s, basically where there's a guy who's trying to drive his wife crazy by telling her that you didn't see what you saw, you didn't hear what you thought you heard. Reality isn't at all what you think. And it actually destroys your confidence in yourself. And when you don't even know what words mean anymore, it makes it impossible to think clearly. Well, unless you're in the habit of defining the words and pinning people down exactly and precisely when they used a word that seems like it's suspicious the
Yeah.
way it's being used. And I try to do that just because I find it amusing and it helps me determine who it is I'm dealing with. If they're really sloppy using words, then they're probably dangerous.
Mm.
Dangerous because they're incompetent, and dangerous because, maybe they're evil. So, look, this is up to you to, whenever you read something that sounds like, or hear something that sounds like bullshit, the idea is to confront it. A, because it's entertaining, but B, because it's necessary for maintaining your own sanity in today's world. This is a very serious issue. I mean, George Orwell went into this in a lot of detail in 1984.
I was reading Jim Rickard's new book the other day, and he was using a term in there that I realized I was just glossing over completely, and it was the term antisocial. He was talking about and I realized this is decades old at least, that's seated in it, that you don't even question it when it comes up. Like, what the hell does that even mean, antisocial? And I was thinking about our private conversations about the manipulation and twisting of language, and how things don't mean necessarily what we think they mean, and we just kind of gloss over it. And that, even that phrase, which I've used, I realized that I don't even know what people mean by when they say that at all. Even that term, I don't know what people mean.
Yeah, exactly. What does that mean to be antisocial? Is that the same thing as being a sociopath? Well, I don't know. If somebody uses the term, maybe it's a good time for a discussion about that. And a discussion about it could be entertaining and very helpful because you can find out how the other person thinks, which is, of course, why I believe that hate speech, which is unaesthetic and in bad taste, and you know, not something that you want to cultivate. But I certainly wouldn't want to illegalize hate speech because it tells me who I'm dealing with and what they think. But if you can't use hate speech, you never really know what's going on in that person's mind. And by the same token, if somebody is using a word that is kind of undefined for exactly the same reason, you want to draw the person out.
Mhm.
You can only learn something. So
That's
I think
scary to
that's the
people
answer.
today. Yeah, I agree. That's scary to people today, though, for some reason. So the next question is, they want to know if you have any future plans associated with your sovereign privatization idea. And we did a whole video on this as well. I'll link to it. It's Doug's very interesting hobby, is what that video was about. But they want to know if you have any future plans for it, or if you know anyone else who's out there making that same pitch or some variant of it right now.
Yeah. There are a number of people that are out there, like Milton Friedman's grandson is supposed to be playing around with sovereign cities or something like that, especially in Honduras. They're trying to do something. There are a number of groups out there that are trying to do things with economic zones of one type or another. I mean, listen, just the other day, there was a guy, um, he was a Belgian who's living here in Uruguay. And he came out to the farm and we had lunch together. And he was telling me how, through his connections with the current president here in Uruguay, it's not hard to get to know the current president in Uruguay, incidentally, that, trying to set Uruguay moving in the right direction. So there are a lot of people that are, and he wrote a paper about it that I've got that I haven't read yet and all this. So I think there are a lot of people doing this, but truth be told, I'm not sure exactly who they are, and I'm not consorting with any of them. Be happy to, but good question. I'm glad there are other people that are playing this game.
Yeah, I agree. It's very interesting. Very interesting. All right. So next question is, if the U.S. is going to have the dystopian future that we all see could be coming, then is a rural area like someplace like Texas, for instance, a safe place to be?
Yeah, I think a rural area is a lot better than an urban area for sure. It's funny. There was an article that was written in Liberty magazine years ago when Liberty was still published in paper. I don't know. I think it's got some kind of a web presence. But anyway, there was a college professor, a libertarian, very bright, who got a gig at some college in the middle of nowhere in Texas. And he was there for a couple of years, and it was driving him crazy because the kids in college didn't know anything except about football and television stuff. And the other professors were kind of catering. He actually thought he was living in a world where everybody had an IQ of 80. And I guess there are places that are intellectually stimulating, like you live in Manhattan and you move in the right crowd. They're all going to be smart people, interesting people. Unfortunately, they're mostly going to be liberals and socialists and worse. And you can go to the middle of Texas and, they'll have kind of down home values, which is nice. They'll be cultural conservatives. It's nice. But it's going to be, as that professor found, it's going to be an intellectual dead zone, because there actually are places like that in the US and the world. So,
Yeah, I'd say where I'm from, and in Iowa is that way. Actually, I definitely felt like that. All the talented, thoughtful people, not all of them, but most of them leave. They go other places where there's greater opportunity. It's one of the advantages I think of if you actually go, if you are an expatriate, if you go to another country. I mean, like when I lived in Buenos Aires, it was amazing the number of people that I met there. Mostly not Argentines. Most of them were also expatriates who were very interesting, and very entertaining. And so you find these pockets of as an expatriate in different places where of really really interesting people.
I agree. This is one of the pluses of moving to a foreign country, even if you're not proficient in the language, is that you'll find expats. And the expats almost all speak English, even if it's not their native language. And the expats tend to be entrepreneurial and freedom oriented and interesting,
Yeah.
much more than the locals who are like peasants that don't go over the next hill because there might be dragons. So maybe that's the answer to the question.
Yeah. Okay. Let's see.
But Central Texas, but I think some disadvantages too.
Yeah, definitely. Okay. So the next questions get into a little bit of the singularity, but also some questions about God and meaning and stuff like that too. So um, uh, first one here is they ask, who is the creator? Is he, it, her, they involved in what's going on right now, or allowing it to happen as a case study? Because history tells us that we have lived up to our means in the past and then were destroyed only to reset and start again, like with the Roman Empire, for instance.
Yeah, well, look, as I've said before, it's kind of degrading, quite frankly, to be told that somebody created you like you were a robot. And So I just don't cotton to that way of thinking.
Mm.
Uh, and if there is a creator out there, which I sincerely doubt, chances are as good as anything that he resembles Dr. Manhattan from The Watchmen. So, look, we're getting into the area of fantasy, but I think seriously about this idea of a creator. I think it's a bad idea, psychologically and philosophically, and just about every other way.
So, so as this goes to this gets where it gets in the singularity part. This is part B of the question is, um, as we, let's see, how do I frame this in a proper question? Um, Thinking about the future and with robotics and the intersection with the singularity, um, do you think that humans essentially become non-existent and instead they kind of get like a downloaded consciousness? I mean, you imagine as we get more connected in the singularity, are we still human? Is our humanness still there?
Yeah, people have been talking about this for many, many, many years, and there's all kinds of variations on this. Maybe we'll become cyborgs. I mean, you lose an arm, you replace an arm. You lose a heart, you replace a heart. And then Elon Musk's thing with
Neuralink.
Neuralink. Uh, can you download your consciousness into a computer? I mean, who knows? But as I've said, I'm basically a solipsist, and I believe that anything that you can imagine can basically be done, certainly with sufficient time and technology. So yeah, and are robots going to take over the world? Could they? I think The Terminator was a fantastic movie from that point of view, and The Matrix, for that matter, the same. There's no reason if robots and computers uh, keep evolving at the rate that they are, why couldn't they become uh, real and alive? I mean, we don't even know what the nature of ourselves are in our brains, or are we even our brains or something else? So yeah, anything's possible.
Yeah, do you see it? I know you talk positively of the singularity, but like, isn't there a risk of, with all the connectedness that we have with technology today, there's much more of a authoritarian control grid right now. Where, we're all tracked with our phones, where we're going and what we're doing. So imagine the singularity commences and we become more connected. And, you think about the stuff that's happened with people being deplatformed on social media, being disconnected from the network, the stuff that John Robb talked a lot about in a prior episode. And, yesterday, people not being able to trade on certain trading platforms. The more connected our lives are, the more risk we have of being, turned off, like disconnected from the network in a way that is much more meaningful than maybe just the inconveniences we might experience today by being deplatformed. Does any of that concern you?
Right. That is definitely a risk, and it scares me. But on the bright side, and as everybody knows, I always look on the bright side, things that look bad to start with usually turn out to be good. Advances in technology in particular. Gunpowder, the rulers had it first to keep the peasants down, but then when the peasants got it, they could overthrow the rulers, which they couldn't do when they were dealing with armored knights that they couldn't touch before. It's I think most advances are like that. Even computers, for that matter, used to be that only the governments and large corporations had computers where they'd store all your information. Now everybody's got one. So they win it first because they have the money and the power that gets these things first. But then things democratize, if you would, and the average guy gets it and it works out. So anything can happen. I don't know. I'm not sure that I can do anything to influence things at this point. So I'm mainly just spectating for my own amusement, truth be told.
Got it. All right. So next question is, we've talked about investments in the oil sector before. Maybe a month ago, you mentioned that you had grown kind of bullish on oil. Just wanted to discuss your thoughts on oil and some investments in that space. What are your thoughts?
Well, to repeat what I said before, looking at the S&P from back during the oil boom days, back in the early 80s when oil stocks were like a third of the value of the S&P to now they're like 2.5%. Everybody thinks, oh, well, we're going to use electric cars. And actually, we're going to use electric airplanes. And, you know, we're not going to need oil. But the fact is that most oil is used as a convenient chemical feedstock. It's the easiest way to get hydrogen and carbon and oxygen, in a goo as opposed to trying to get it other places. So no, oil's not going to go away, and oil stocks are very cheap right now, and especially Canadian oil stocks, because among other things, well, of the pipeline deal that what's his name,
Right.
Biden
Yep.
has quashed. So yeah, I'm bullish on oil, partially oil because oil is a political commodity. And as the world edges towards something that looks like World War III, oil is not going to be crossing borders as easily, and it'll become more valuable for a lot of different reasons. So it's a long argument. I haven't thought it out. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Here are the reasons. But yeah, I'm generally bullish on oil, quite frankly.
All right. Okay. Doug, what thoughts do you have on Bahrain and its growth prospects? This is coming from a European who's considering moving there for a time.
Well, I haven't been to Bahrain, but I have been to the Emirates. And from what I understand, I mean, Bahrain's main value is it's a big oil producer and it's a big US naval base. So that's what Bahrain is all about. It doesn't sound, from what I can determine, very interesting or even very nice, because the Saudis kind of try to keep it under their thumb, as do the Americans. So I think if you want to move to that part of the world, I would definitely choose Dubai, which is a really fun international place. Whether it'll last, because you're fighting the desert constantly, I don't know how Dubai is going to work out. But if I was going to go to that part of the world, that's where I would choose.
Hmm.
No question about it.
Okay. Next question. They're curious to hear your opinion on Mexico in general as a potential escape into a more libertarian future with an open and free economy.
Yeah, well, Mexico is a country that really ought to break up into several different countries. And of course, to this day, there are secession movements uh, in a number of places in Mexico. So, how do I like Mexico? Well, Jeff Berwick, well, you've been to Acapulco. He loves it in Mexico. He's got a Mexican wife. No particular opinion, quite frankly, about Mexico. I mean, one nice thing about Mexico is there are so many Mexicans that have come to the United States and then come back. So a lot of people speak English. It's kind of like their second language, which is not true once you get south to places like Guatemala, and forget about that, and absolutely forget about El Salvador, and forget about Honduras. Yeah, I think Mexico might be okay. I don't have any strong feeling about it. If I was going to go to Central America, I would definitely go to Panama. That's where I would go. You've got nice places on the beach, lots of expats. Everybody speaks English, almost everybody. Got nice places in the mountains. Panama City, everything works. It's advanced. It's convenient. So if you're thinking about Mexico, why not think about Panama instead?
I think the one thing about Panama compared to Mexico is that the way that they handled COVID was quite different, and that Mexico had was a much freer hand, on that for the people living there, versus Panama had pretty strict Colombia like lockdown, at least for the first several months.
Yeah, whether that has to do with the American influence and the canal, uh, I don't know. But all of these governments, almost all of them, except for the Swedes and the Tanzanians, I don't know who else, the Belarusians, are acting completely irrationally and dangerously. So it's unpredictable. I don't know who's running Panama at this point. I met a president of Panama. I think it was Torrijos' son.
Mm,
It was a pretty meaningless meeting. I don't know who's running that place now,
I
quite
don't either.
frankly.
Kind of a good thing in a way, like who's, did not know who the head of state is not necessarily a bad thing. It's a good thing in Switzerland. It's a good sign, right?
Yeah, it is a good sign, but maybe that's just because Panama is kind of a nothing nowhere place with only a few million citizens.
Could be.
So nobody needs to know unless it's an active psychopath.
Right. Okay. All right. So let's see. Next question. Which non-North American culture does Doug particularly admire, or that he could most easily integrate into? Those are two different questions, I think, but
Yeah, those are really two different questions. Huh. Yeah, it's a problem. Look, it's great being an expatriate in a country. It helps though if you have money. I mean, if you look, if you're an American that goes to live in Latin America and you don't have money, chances are you're going to be looked down on as what I call a Central American American. In other words, somebody that's down on his luck and is there because the cost of living is low, the beer is cheap, and young women are available. So, not a very appealing picture. It really helps to have, if you're going to be an expat, you've got to have money. And there are always problems when you're in a different culture. A lot of advantages. I mean, the advantages for me have far outweighed the disadvantages of being in different cultures. And I've lived in 10 different countries at this point. But it depends. It really depends. Don't forget what happened to Sean Connery in that movie, The Man Who Would Be King.
mm,
Uh, it may have been Sean Connery's best movie, that and Robin and Marion. But anyway, that's a tangent. You go to these countries and you'll always be kind of an outsider. Good news and bad news. But where do you go? I mean, look, you go to New Zealand or Australia, you can definitely fit in with the natives. That's not North America. But both of those two places have turned into police states much more than the US has. What culture do I really admire? I really like Japan
I was going to say
and
the
I
same.
like the culture
Yeah,
and it seems great. I enjoy Japan.
I do too.
But on the other hand, I just finished reading E.B. Sledge's book, um, With the Old Breed, which was about World War II in the Pacific. And all those soldiers absolutely hated the Japanese. Talking about being racist, they absolutely hated them. So things change. Well, the Japanese going back to being what they were like in the 30s and 40s, anything can happen.
I think could happen.
Yeah. I'm not being very helpful, I know, but
Well, but I think, well, let's talk. What is it that you admire about the Japanese culture today, as it exists today, as you've experienced it now? Maybe that would help.
well, it is probably the cleanest and most orderly country in the world. However, uh, when oh, who was it that opened up Japan in the 1850s?
Um,
Sailed in there and basically told the emperor they were going to they were going to blow up Tokyo with their cannon.
It was an
And
American captain, right?
Perry, maybe. Was it
Yeah,
Perry?
yeah, Perry. Yeah,
Yeah.
Perry.
Okay. But at the time, uh, the Americans commented on what a dirty and filthy place Japan was. I mean, things like the bathrooms were just incredibly bad. It's like going out into the country in China. I mean, it's just horrible. I mean, the lack of cleanliness and so forth. So Japan went from being at the bottom of the barrel to the top, and went from being the most militarist and racist country in the world to, quite a nice and mellow place that I wouldn't mind living. So things change. Japan's a perfect example of how a country can change.
Yeah. The thing I admire about their culture now, as I've experienced it, of course, it's a lot. There's a lot as an outsider that's will always be opaque to you. There'll be parts, the subtleties you can't even really see and understand a lot of the parts of the culture. But the effort to turn almost everything into art is amazing. Like from like tea ceremonies to whatever, anything. I mean, the effort to turn things into art is pretty outstanding. I'd really enjoy that.
Yeah, it is. And of course, one thing about Japan is you'll never be a Japanese. It's just not going to happen. I mean, it's a racial thing. Racial things exist. It's like Thailand. I spent a lot of time in Thailand, love it, but I'll never be a Thai.
Oh.
And even if I tried, I'd never be able to speak Thai properly. There are problems with all these things. So I guess this is why, perhaps at base, I'm what the Soviets called a rootless cosmopolitan.
Nothing wrong with that.
I don't think there is, quite frankly. I mean, it's part of, having your passport one place, your residence another, your business in a third, your bank account in a fourth. I mean, and in today's world, that's much more possible than it ever has been. So I guess that's my answer to the question. I like almost every place I go on
Yeah.
some basis, quite frankly.
The part
But
people don't like about the rootlessness, Doug, is the part with like the lack of relationships or community that they imagine associated with it. But under the file concept, you have friends everywhere you go. I mean, there is a community actually that you have.
that is a good point. If you believe in the file concept, your family is all over the world. So no matter where you go, you have good family, not just accident of birth family.
Mm-hmm.
Good point, Matt.
Okay, let me get into this question. It's a long and kind of drawn out, but and it's a little biblical, but I think it's worth getting into here. So it starts off. Everyone seems to be focused on the U.S. economy and politics, but seem to be ignorant about what is happening globally. From perfect little New Zealand, where this person is originally from, to the places where COVID-19 impacts globally. The World Economic Forum objectives, famines, natural disasters all over the place, plagues, volcanoes, rumors of war, and becoming ever so more frequent, like birth pains. He's saying these things are becoming more frequent, like birth pains. Because obviously, Doug has escaped to his hideaway, and this reminds him of this Bible quote from Isaiah, which is I'll just read it. Come, my people, enter thou into thy chambers, and shut thy doors about thee. Hide thyself, as it were, for a little moment, until the indignation be overpast. Question is, I understand Doug does not believe, but is he applying this verse being the time to keep one's head down and out of sight?
I think it's one of those times, such as we went through in World War I and World War II. And H.L. Mencken, who's certainly one of my favorite writers from all kinds of points of view, basically dummied up during World War I and World War II because he realized that humans can transform from polite and well-groomed tea drinkers into wild and crazy chimpanzees, and their governments will incite them in that direction. So we may be going into that time. And I guess if we're ever deplatformed, maybe just for our own good, we just stay deplatformed before we draw the serious attention of the powers that be. But
Well, especially we're just doing this for our entertainment and personal enjoyment anyway.
exactly. And I see you sent me the question. He mentions Matthew 24, which is really an interesting chapter in the New Testament. This is where it talks about the abomination of desolation and wars and rumors of wars, and makes a reference to the arising of an antichrist. I mean, this is where the Bible gets really groovy. I mean, they do fire and brimstone superbly well. I mean, one of the reasons for the immense success of Abrahamic religions is the poetry of the writers. I guess if you're out in the desert all day long, you've got time to refine your language and means of expression. So it's great stuff to read. I think everybody should look up Matthew 24. Well, but what about it? Is that my vision for the future? It's funny because before we went on the air, Matt and I were talking about a book that I'm currently reading called The Fall of Rome. I'm only about 25 pages into it, but this isn't the time to talk about different theories about what it was like when Rome fell and why and all that. But I really like this book because it's well written. And it talks about the fact that after Rome fell, it was just damned unpleasant. It wasn't like a transition or anything like that. It was hell for the Romans after the barbarians invaded. So are we looking at something like that coming up where civilization can collapse? Well, yeah, I think it's possible. There's no guarantees that, when you go to the Safeway, you're going to be able to buy some artisanal bread because there's no guarantee that the farmer's crop isn't going to fail or 1,000 other things can happen. So yeah, I think we're in for some tough times, but I hope I'm wrong. I really prefer good times to bad times. I don't know
Yes.
if that answers the question or not.
Uh, I think I think that's probably good enough. I think that's good enough. We're in for some tough times, whether it's Matthew 24 biblical bad times or not. It's going to be tough. It seems like regardless. Okay. So the next question is, curious if Doug anticipates them coming after gold the way they're coming after Bitcoin now. A repeat of 1933 when FDR went after gold. And I think he's referring to just some statements that have been made by Janet Yellen about Bitcoin being a problem. And I think, also in Europe, someone said something about Bitcoin potentially being a problem, but they're not really going after it yet, as far as I can tell. I'm certainly not to the level of gold, but the real question is, do you think they'll go after gold again, as they did in 1933?
Entirely possible, especially now, since a lot of people are buying bullion type gold coins, which of course, double eagles and that type of thing, which are now collectibles, sovereigns, they were just bullion type gold coins in those days too. Sure, it's entirely possible because just like they're saying Bitcoin is used by criminals to transfer wealth between each other and so forth. And it is. And so what? That's what money is for. It's fungible. Yeah, it's quite possible, especially as gold starts heading towards closer to $10,000 an ounce. Yeah, it's possible. So I guess it's something we're going to have to confront, just like now that they've got some maniac in charge of guns in Washington. I forget who it is. I mean, some nothing nobody that hates guns. So Biden chose him or her. I forget who it is even. You're going to have to confront, what are you going to do when they come for your guns? That's a good question.
Well,
I mean, are you going to hand them over? Or are you going to say that you were out on a boat plinking and it fell in the water and you
Yeah.
don't know where it is, or I mean, there's all kinds of possibilities with both gold and guns, and God knows what else in the future.
Yeah.
So I don't have an answer, and I don't recommend anybody violate the law because that opens up another kettle of fish that smells like a dog's breakfast.
It does.
So good question.
Yeah, and I think we're learning more and more each week that the powers that be will do anything, like that everything is on the table. Things that just the situation with GameStop stock yesterday, I thought was fantastic in that it illustrated that they're willing to change the rules in the middle of the game if necessary in order to keep the game going the way they want it to go. And it's like it doesn't matter if the precedent doesn't matter, legality, laws are interpreted, and so they can shape them any way they want.
Yeah, they can and they will. So another question, which there's actually no good answer.
No good answer. Okay, let's see. What would Doug do if he lived in China as a Westerner at the moment, as a 30-year-old man? And this guy asked us because this is his specific situation. Is that a good choice now? And how can it be used to one's advantage? He says Jim Rogers is a big proponent of China and sees a bright future there. What businesses would Doug start from China, and how would you approach it if you were dropped in China as a 30-year-old man?
Well, I'm not sure if I was going to be airdropped someplace, I'd want it to be China. And the reason is that I like to be on an on-level playing field. And China, the average Chinese, certainly in the big cities like Shanghai, is so well educated, and he's not penniless anymore. I'm not sure your marginal advantage there is that great, frankly. I
Yeah.
mean, you do have experiences and connections, which can be valuable for trade purposes. That can be valuable, but there are so many overseas Chinese in the US and Canada and everywhere that your utility, even in that way, is somewhat marginalized. That's why I think the best place to go today is Africa, actually, for just those reasons. Not sure what I'd do. I'd have to think about, other than what I've just said, I'd have to think about.
It's different. 15, even just 15 years ago, Doug, I know that, from friends I have that were in China at that point, if they were an American in China 15, 20 years ago, that you could get senior positions on boards because they wanted just to have a Westerner as part of the company to help add to its legitimacy. But that's not at all necessary anymore for these Chinese companies to have that legitimacy. They don't need that. They're not looking for that signaling anymore.
That's right. And even 20 years ago, Westerners were few and far between. We were interesting, special, different. Not the case anymore. So Jim Rogers being in Singapore, that's one thing. Singapore is a really convenient place to live. You can get everything you want. It's so civilized and so clean and so convenient and safe. You're not going to get mugged walking down the street under any circumstances. But Jim's in a different position. He's a billionaire.
Yeah.
So a little bit different type of thing.
Yeah, but he's raised his daughters who speak, fluent Chinese and, are actually like pop stars. I don't know if you've seen them, any videos of these daughters singing in Chinese, these, folk poems. And I mean, they're kind of, they're little celebrities there, actually. It's pretty amazing.
Oh, isn't that interesting? And I'm sure they're cute too.
They are really cute. Yeah. Yep. Really beautiful girls.
Yeah. Anyway, listen, it's great being in Shanghai and stick your nose into everything. And maybe you'll find something that's really interesting, or people that figure there's something you can really do for them. I can't think of anything right now just because China is gotten so advanced and there's so many Chinese around the world and plenty of Westerners in China too.
Yeah.
And
If I were in Shanghai now, I think I'd look at the expat community there, though, actually for the easiest opportunities, because there's a lot of, it could be that companies are looking to expand there and that they need more, people with a Western disposition for the companies that are trying to do business in China. So it's it could be reversed, but I'd look to that expat community, which is really, really robust in Shanghai, especially. I mean, that'd be my default.
that's an excellent point, Matt. That's where I would start. Go to all the expat clubs, places where expats hang out, and get to know these guys and open up opportunities that way. I think it would be easier than trying to get into Chinese society directly. Yeah, that's a very good point.
Okay. So next question is, will there be a new international man book coming or series coming out in the near future?
I think not. I don't think people read books anymore. Everything is online from that point of view. So I guess not. That, and I'm too lazy to write it. So
All right. Although we are still toying with the idea of a Renaissance man book. That's still out there.
yeah, that's true. I've got to, I don't want to raise my necessity level.
Not.
I'm becoming poor again. I've just got to, I've just got to reduce my level of being inert, fat, dumb, and happy. So I don't know.
All right. So, well, one thing I'll say, you're right that the reading has gone down, but audiobook consumption has gone way up, and we get questions all the time wondering when will Assassin be available on audiobook? Like, there's, and I know it's heard, that it's being worked on, but I'm telling you, there's a lot of demand for it from our viewers.
Gee, I'm going to have to talk to John. I haven't looked on Amazon recently, but I was sure it was already there, but I guess it's not. Wow, that's shocking because it's been read for weeks. So let me find out what the glitch is.
Could be there within the last couple of weeks, but if it is, let me know, and I'll make an announcement to people, because I know a lot of people were waiting for it, but I haven't seen it. So, the next question. So Ryan says, I understand how gold does well in periods of inflation, but could Doug explain how gold would perform in periods of deflation?
Well, it can form, look, what happens in deflation is the dollar becomes more valuable. Why? Because dollars disappear. Why? Stock market crashes, thought you had $1 million in stock. It's not there anymore. Where'd the dollars go? A bond defaults, dollars aren't there anymore. They died and went to money level. So price level goes down with less dollars. So the reason why gold can do well in a deflation is there's no counterparty risk. You don't have to trust somebody to give you your money back. You've got the money itself. That's basically the reason. It's not paper, which can dry up and blow away or be defaulted on. It's the real thing. It's wealth in itself. It just happens to also be good as money. So that's why it's good in a deflation.
Got it. And someone asked, what do you think the chances are of having a deflationary shock within the next couple of years? And the effect, they're asking again, what effect it would have on asset prices, precious metal miners, and the general stock market.
A deflationary shock would be a disaster for the general stock market, which is only up at these levels because of the titanic wave of money coming out of all of the world's central banks. So, but it's possible. I mean, in a world that's hugely indebted, somebody defaults on the debt and they're not bailed out at all because they're not politically favored or in time. And it's a daisy chain where one girl can't pay the other, can't pay the other, can't pay the other, and they all go down because they're all so leveraged. How's it going to affect precious metals? It's questionable if it's a deflation, but probably it's not going to hurt them or even help them because people are going to panic into gold and out of paper where there's counterparty risk. And as far as the miners are concerned, the main danger is the government. But before that happens, I think they're going to go a lot higher. So I remain long
Mm.
mining stocks, which nobody has any interest in or knowledge of today. It's the only place I can figure out to be in the stock market today.
Okay, I'll just ask one other question here, Doug, because we have more, but this is getting a little long. Um,
Yeah.
let's see. We'll do this one. Have you studied the Vedic knowledge from ancient India?
No, no, I haven't. I've tried to make my way through the, oh goodness, the Ramayana. They've got two important poetic books, but I couldn't make my way through them, to tell you the truth. And, you know, the idea of these numerous gods, they don't seem quite as interesting and poetic as the Greek gods or even the Norse gods do.
Mm.
So I guess I'm ignorant in this area. And actually, India is the big blank spot on my map. I've never, shameful to say this, never been to India. So I know lots of Indians, read a lot of books about it, but don't have any boots on the ground knowledge, and really not of their religion in particular. Although I do know that Modi, the guy running India, is kind of a Hindu nationalist. Can't be of much help.
I can't pronounce it right, but it's the Bhagavad Gita. Is that how you say it? Something
Oh,
like
the
that?
Bhagavad Gita, yes, right. Yeah, couldn't
Yeah.
make my way through it. Just couldn't. But then again, maybe it was a bad translation. Translation means everything. So maybe that's the reason. I don't know.
All right. Okay, well, we'll leave it at that for now. Thank you, everybody, for your questions. If you have questions for us, you'd like us to cover in another episode, I encourage you to come on our Telegram channel, which there's a link for in the description. Join our Telegram channel, ask the questions through there. Those got the priority this time versus all the other questions I found. And so if you want your question answered, please go there. And other than that, Doug, I hope you have a great weekend, and we'll be back on Monday.
Thanks, Matt. I will look forward to it.